course, we're following the political drama in Israel, with Sunday now set on the day that a new government will be sworn in, ending the 12-year run of Benjamin Netanyahu as Israel's leader and replacing him as prime minister with Naftali Bennett, head of the Yamina party. And with us in studio is George Birnbaum, a strategic advisor to Naftali Bennett and managing director of Mercury Public Affairs. And George, before the break, we were talking, and you mentioned you did work for Prime Minister Netanyahu. You were chief of staff, I think, for him at one point in the 1990s. So much of this political drama that's developed in the past couple of years seems to revolve around decisions made by Benjamin Netanyahu, the man we think of as a political genius, as a magician, and yet you look at several of the steps he made that backfired on him, alienating Naftali Bennett, making an opening to the Israeli Arab Ram party that made it possible for the Change Coalition to bring it in, really being behind the creation of this religious Zionism party of Bezalel Smotrich that refused to sit with the Ram party, denying him a majority. How do you explain what happened to Benjamin Netanyahu's political acumen in the past couple of years?
Yeah, I will say that I have enormous respect for Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've known him for 25 years. He still is one of the most intelligent and capable leaders that I've met and worked with across the world. Sometimes you're just handed a set of cards that aren't very good, and I think in Israel, there's always been a clear dividing line in Israeli elections: pieces versus security, right versus left, secular versus religious. This was really a campaign, an election about Bibi or not Bibi, and it was just a very hard election for him to maneuver through. And the cards he was dealt was not very good.
Can I ask you something? Because it seems to me, and you may disagree with it, that in the past couple of years, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in some sense, has tried to adopt at least some of the rhetoric and playbook of President Trump, of Donald Trump, apply it to the Israeli political scene. But Israel's right wing or conservative wing is very different from that in the United States. And it seemed to me that sometimes the tone did not strike the results he was hoping for. And indeed, it was much of the right that turned on him in this election.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we first came in 1996 to work with Prime Minister Netanyahu, back then Benjamin Netanyahu, we thought right versus left was similar here than it was in the United States. It was freedom and justice. The right in America likes freedom, left wants justice. It's not the case here. That just doesn't exist here. And I think a lot of mimicking of the rhetoric of Donald Trump was a wrong strategy, because Trump's strategy was really about talking to the base in America, which is a freedom base. And that doesn't exist here in Israel. That's not the issue here. And so I think trying to mimic Donald Trump and that rhetoric probably wasn't a wise decision.
Right. I want to now talk about Naftali Bennett. We talked about strategy. Let's talk a little more about his, now that he'll be prime minister. One issue, now you've worked in U.S. politics. You mentioned you worked with Arthur Finkelstein, of course, who was one of the leading, or even I would say guru of conservative political strategists in the United States. Naftali Bennett has U.S. experience, but his views are at odds with the Biden administration. How do you think he's going to be able to navigate with the Biden White House, which seems determined to revive the two-state solution, maybe now starting to look like maybe revive a peace process in which Naftali Bennett's views are quite different?
I'm hoping that the Americans are smart and that they understand that putting a lot of pressure on a young coalition like this could just maybe break apart the coalition. My sense is that the Americans won't be so forceful with Naftali Bennett in the early stages. But Naftali's going to have to navigate that as prime minister. And the Americans are going to have to also understand that this coalition, if they want it to be sustained for the next 4 years, have to almost adjust their own views in order to align themselves with this coalition. So it'll be very interesting from a foreign policy point of view from the Biden administration as to how hard they push for some of the core beliefs that they want to achieve as a U.S. administration.
And I want to talk also politically. Now, this new government has a set of guidelines. They've pledged not to deal with certain divisive issues. And one of them is the Palestinian issue. It's going to be quite limited in what it can do. One of the areas that could prove controversial are areas of religion and state. Naftali Bennett has allied himself with certainly two politicians, Yair Lapid and Avigdor Lieberman, who have definitely pushed for making some kind of progress in moving Israel more toward a civil society, or one less determined by, for example, Orthodox religious tradition. Is this going to be something he's going to be comfortable with? Is it going to cause issues with either his constituency or maybe with the ultra-Orthodox parties, which perhaps in the future he will want to see either in this government or allied with him in a future one?
I don't know that I can answer that. I haven't been privy to those internal negotiations when it comes to the coalition agreements. I do know Naftali as a person, and he has a very strong Jewish soul. He's very deeply committed to a Jewish state and the nature of the Jewish state, and I think he will do everything he can to maintain that, even when it comes to issues like civil marriage or other issues that may threaten the sense of the Jewish state and the nature of the Jewish people.
Now, I can't ask you if you've prepared a strategy for Naftali Bennett if this government does not last the full 4 years. Do you think that this government, though, will last the 4 years? A lot of skepticism, even among its members. They've openly admitted to me that they see it as a very fragile coalition.
It's fragile, but they have common interests right now, and as long as they keep those common interests going, this will be a stable and long-lasting government. Time will tell. They will be tested like every other Israeli government, and we'll see if they can work together.
Okay, well, one maybe a motivating factor is that in the coming elections, some of them may encounter some trouble, in which case it'll just be more work for you.
That's always a motivating factor in Israeli politics.
Of course, the fear of the next election. Well, that's what keeps you going in business. George Birnbaum, strategic advisor to incoming Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. It sounds strange even to say that at this stage. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.